Okay. Discussion meeting Tuesday, February 13th, Mr. McGill.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm just checking.
Go
I
ahead.
checked with IT to make sure we were good. We are.
Right.
Agenda items. We have a very short agenda tonight. We have a consideration of a resolution authorizing the destruction of certain municipal records. We follow the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission Municipal Records Retention Act. We do this every year. And then the second agenda item is the consideration to purchase one new ice resurfacer machine from Engo North America. It's the replacement of a 1997 resurfacer. For those of you who want to put that in context, it's essentially the Zamboni, but the Zamboni is a actual brand name. So,
Got it. Thank you very much. Okay, Tennis Center RFP, Mr. Donnellan, Andrew McCreary.
And Ian from above.
I thought it was just a back row.
Okay, thank you, commissioners. Just to recap, we issued an RFP for year-round tennis center operations back in December. Indoor Tennis for Mount Lebanon put together a very good proposal, which we were considering and working with them to see if we could reach an agreement. However, Indoor has made the decision not to move forward with their proposal. However, they pledged their support to the municipality for a smooth operation and, indicated their commitment to the success of the tennis center. So
they essentially just withdrew the proposal they gave us, is that?
correct.
Okay.
I think when they looked at, the commitment involved and, their ability to do it, they just determined that the municipality would have the best chance for success at this. So we're disappointed, that they won't be moving forward, but we appreciate their support and, the confidence they've placed in us as well. So the other option, which has always been the recreation department, would assume year-round operations of tennis. And we have a plan ready to set in motion to do that. I think overall this will lead to a just better programs and more efficiently run tennis center just by the virtue of having one entity running operations. So the immediate plan, we're moving into the outdoor season, the season that we're always responsible for. So we're going to do what we always do. We will prepare the facility for opening. We have the RFP already out for the spring resurfacing of the courts. We will do our regular part-time hiring, whether it's cashiers, part-time maintenance, or instructors. So we'll bring back people from last year, hire new folks where we need to run our programs. And we will promote the facility and programs as well. We're also going to post a full-time racket center manager position. We want to get that person on board as quickly as possible so they can assist with planning and hiring. We also recently selected a full-time maintenance person for tennis. Their start date will be 2 weeks from yesterday, so February 26th. That gives them 2 months to get up to speed and start to plan. They'll also be working alongside Indoor. They'll see the bubble down process and become very familiar with that, so that they can lead that process in the future. Once we have a full-time manager on board, we'll work together with that person to plan a full-time tennis professional in some shape or form, but we'd like to have that tennis expert on board to help make that decision and determine the best path forward there. And then there's the transition plan for indoor operations. We'll need to learn the nuts and bolts of the indoor season. I mean, we're familiar with the big picture, but we need to see what they do on a daily basis. So we'll work hand in hand with them. The new maintenance person will learn all aspects of bubble up down process. We'll get indoors customer lists so that we can bring back this year's subscribers for next year. We'll get their vendor list, so we're prepared for maintenance and any other issues that come up. And again, indoors gonna be here. They're part of our tennis community. We intend to use them as a resource, to help us moving forward. And then, I guess finally, we'll work with the PIO to communicate all these changes to the public so that they have an understanding of, what we're doing there. And then Andrew has a handle on the financial projections in this plan, and I'll turn it over to him for that.
A quick question for, when tentatively do the bubbles go down?
We're gonna come down, I think the specific date is April 15.
Okay,
There's always a backup if there's high winds or something, they'll move that back.
okay.
Yeah,
Give me a
but-
ballpark, so thank you.
Yeah, April 15. And so we typically open the outdoor on May 1st. Weather and court conditions, being favorable.
Can before you go to financials, can I just provide a little bit of additional background? I know
Yeah.
that everybody in this room is probably familiar, but we may have residents who are not. So historically, for a long time, Indoor has run the tennis center for 7 months. The municipalities run it for 5 months, 7 months by Indoor when the bubbles are up, 5 by the municipality when they're not. Indoor originally approached the municipality because they were experiencing some difficulties in filling the part-time positions that they needed in order to run their operations. We quite honestly faced some of the same challenges trying to fill our part-time positions for our operations. What was agreed to through the budget workshops and conversations we had with Indoor was that the municipality would retain a full-time maintenance person to have at least continuity for that component of the tennis center operation. So we did move forward with that, as David had indicated. We've made an offer of employment. On the good news side, that's a person that is familiar with the tennis center. They will need to learn some additional, I will say, responsibilities and those types of things, but it's not somebody who this is just, they're not familiar with the facility. So that's a good thing. And in Indoor, we worked very closely back and forth. We had a number of in-person meetings and then also conversations to try to put them in a position where they felt they could be successful in taking that over as a full-time operation. Ultimately, in the end, they just weren't confident that they'd be in that position. And we had always envisioned potentially that we would have to sort of step into that role. To David's point, I think it will allow us a greater continuity of operations for the tennis center overall. I will tell you that there's probably a significant segment of the population who never realized there was a distinction between indoor tennis
right.
and Mount Lebanon.
Mhm.
So in some ways, the public may not notice a lot of a change in terms of that. But again, I think that there are a lot of opportunities here and we're gonna try to take advantage of those. And I'll let Andrew cover the financial pieces for you.
Thank you. So just to Indoor's credit, we've been fully transparent back and forth as this process has gone on. Their treasurer, Dan Hackett, and myself have exchanged numerous emails of financial information. What they, plus they have to, as part of their agreement, submit to David every year, their audited financial statements, what they submit to the IRS. So it's very open and transparent. We sent them everything they needed to make sure they made the right decision for Indoor. So unfortunately, as they both stated, they decided to pass. So based on all the projections that we had, one of the ideas we had was combining both of them, right? That'd be like the first thing you do, right? To say take their 7 months and our 5 months, where would we end up? Taking out the full-time maintenance position, we'd end up, right around the cut line, right? So right around a break-even point, plus or minus 20,000, let's say. But we knew and we committed to as a commission in the budget was to face a deficit for this function in order to improve the facility operations as the maintenance person. So to rehash that function level deficit for this year that we were looking at was about 120,000 for the year for the tennis center operation. So that was the commitment to the municipality of coming out of general tax dollars that wasn't covered by fees. In the arrangement we were foreseeing coming where we would still have an indoor season. And that we would have we'd be on the hook for the full-time maintenance position as we had done.
Is that
So
twenty twenty-four or through this time next year?
that's 2024.
2024.
2024. So, we know we're gonna have savings because it's a couple months in, so we have a couple months of savings because we knew we weren't gonna hire it right away, but that was kind of the max
Right.
commitment there. So when we run the projection, so the nice thing is that, for those at home, the indoor tennis season, while they have their maintenance budget, insurance and those types of things as a separate organization, the biggest expense outside of payroll is utilities. And we pay them and they reimburse us. So we have all the utility data from year over year, so we knew what the utilities were going to be.
Right.
Payroll wise, we have a pretty good handle on how the operation's gonna go. Yes, there's less bubbles, but you still need a cashier there, you know, the amount of time that a tennis center would be open, and we had projected that during the budget time, and you'd seen that at various levels. So we have a pretty good idea of the maintenance and all those things that are required of a tennis center and overall the recreation facility. David and his team and all of their facilities have a very good handle on what that means. So David and I went back and forth. We projected month by month, kind of what revenues we know come in, how we would expect that to be. So for 2024, it's probably gonna be an additional 40,000 max is our projection that we're gonna need as a budget amendment. Right, so we're gonna need to get this thing up and lift it off the ground, about a $40,000 commitment.
The 120, which we already committed to,
Correct.
plus the 40,
Correct.
and that, right, so that's just really management and some other stuff. It's not really improvements, that's normal operations, up and down, bubbles, all that stuff.
Correct. Now, that's up and down levels, but it's also a full-time tennis center manager and a full-time head pro. So we budgeted that in there, so you would know the max, if that's where the operations manager and David decide to go, and the manager, and they all decide, hey, the manager being Keith McGill, not the manager of the, yeah. So if all three of them come together and say, hey, we think this is the best path
Right.
forward, that's those. So that's the worst case scenario for this year. So, you can then look at it another way, is we don't know how the revenue is going to impact. We feel it's going to be increased because we're gonna have more focus there. That's with really a revenue neutral, kind of combining all the information we have of both organizations. So any increased revenues are only gonna eat into that number, to
Right.
the positive for us, right? And we feel that that's gonna happen. So if you did quick and rough numbers, which we will get absolutely during the 2025 budget process, which we will do later this year, we will have 4 to 6 months of an operations manager of what their plan is. They're gonna be coming up with, I imagine David and his team are gonna be coming up with that forward-thinking plan of all things tennis center, and how that's gonna look. But looking forward and projecting between 10 and 20% increase in revenue in the various areas, programs, permitting, permitting meaning, indoor tennis season reservations and those types of things, and having a fully dedicated staff to it. Looking at a worst case scenario that we only increase 10%, because we think, hey, we can at least get to 10%. We're really talking in the neighborhood of 100 to 200,000. I'm sorry, 100 to 120,000, which is where we were at this year. I think adding that staff and doing those things, and with the 10 to 20%, depending on the various areas of programs and those things, I think we may land where we're at this year. Then moving forward in 26, 27, as it grows and becomes more of an operation that's more consistent year over year, as we've seen in our other operations. They'll make adjustments, tweaks to where they need to in programming. And that's, I think, where we're gonna then start to see that numbers really start to come down. So what I'm here to tell you tonight is, I think based on what we're seeing this year for 24 and 25, there will be a necessity for, general tax revenues to help lift this off the ground to a consistent. We were expecting that anyway with the RFP. I don't want it to think that our solution was the only one that was gonna cost
Right.
money. But I think David and his staff will be able to do that. No problem. I don't foresee any issue that being lifted off the ground. It's just, it needs to, in these first couple of years, have a little help to get it up off the ground.
Andrew, you made a comment, I just want to make sure I got this right, about needing, I'm not sure I got the dollar number right here to get this project off the ground. Did I hear you right, $40,000 to get this project off the ground?
Correct. So what I'm stating is that what I believe is us moving forward with a full-time tennis center man, I'm gonna come to you with a budget amendment that's gonna say, hey, we're gonna need 40,000 for this year net to increase to make sure that we lift that off the ground for 24. That's my estimate. David and I working together to get that to you.
Okay.
Okay, to have that tonight. If anything changes in the interim in the first 3 months, we'll let you know. We'll keep you apprised as it goes. I mentioned the manager and David will let you know as we move forward. And then, of course, during budget time, we're hoping that that number really stays neutral,
Right.
as in still 100 to 120K needed to really lift this off the ground to where it can start sustaining with all the programs and all the things that it needs to do to get lifted up off the ground
But it's that $40,000 seed money.
for this year. Yeah.
I suspect you do this anyway, but it would be good to understand when we get to budget time, you know, we're gonna have a full-time manager, we'll have a pro. I'm sure as they get into things, they're gonna have a punch list of items that they would love to have. As we have a new set of, you know, hopefully better programming, which, you know, I think it's good to be conservative, but we probably will see better, whether it's programming or more revenue, whatever that turns out, and we get into budget season, it'll be good to understand for next year, you know, do we need to make improvements, right? Because we're probably not gonna have $120,000 worth of new revenue with programs unless, you know,
Right.
programs are stellar. So it might be good to understand, you know, if we invest in the tennis center, what would that look like to get to? We talked about this before, we don't need revenue neutral necessarily recreation, but, you know, to have a good list from the people coming in, if we did these things, we could do this. You know, we could offer this. I'm sure there's like gonna be a punch list of that stuff then, you know.
The other piece of sort of the closeout of indoor will be coming back to the commission, I would imagine at some point with an agreement related to the transfer of assets, I'll say.
Bank accounts.
And those assets would be a potential resource for reinvestment back into the tennis center for some of the types of items that you're referring to. I
Yeah, because normally they would put money in for some of that maintenance.
Correct. They've been, I'll say, assembling funds towards the future replacement of the bubbles, towards the replacement of some of the courts. So again, once we've got sort of that additional data, we'll be able to better identify, you know, where those sources should be invested. The other thing that we will probably get from our experience in operating the tennis center full-time is maybe another look or a relook at staffing levels, right? To make sure that we're appropriately staffed for whatever programs we bring on board. So a lot more to come, but we wanted to give you an update in terms of sort of the next steps, if you will.
Right. It's good to me.
Forward to testing it live.
Yeah, we are too. I think it's exciting. I think it's gonna be successful. We have a great resource out there.
Yeah.
And when we hire some good people and they can work on these things on a full-time basis, I think the results will be good.
It sounds very positive. Thank you. Thanks for all the work. Next, Mr. McMeans. Boards and authorities.
Yes.
Thank you, commissioners. Nick or whoever's running the meeting, can we move the little square up to the top corner if possible? So I'll give a little introduction first. So thank you for once again hearing me on advisory boards and authorities. The commission has done a lot of work and a lot of thinking on this topic over the last year and a half. This was identified as a commission priority project a while back. Thank you, Andrew. And we have successfully passed an ordinance regarding realigning our advisory boards. And we did the very unique thing of structuring our whole comprehensive plan, which the commission adopted last month, around our new advisory boards. To my knowledge, that's the only comp plan in Pennsylvania that is directly aligned with the advisory board structure. So we have done something unique and innovative as far as local government goes. And one of the final steps for the commission before we institute the new advisory boards, which per the ordinance take effect on April 1st of this year, is to approve the policies and procedures document. This is probably the third or fourth time I think I've given you this
Right.
document. Is backed up in your packets. You've seen it before, but I thought it would be a good idea both for the commissioners and for the potential new advisory board members to have this presentation as a resource that we can point them back to. We can then share the video of the discussion session and say, hey, here's a whole overview of how we envision these boards operating. So thanks specifically to Commissioner Flynn, who also did a lot of work on this and a lot of thinking and a lot of long conversations that took a lot of time on the nitty-gritty details. So I will try and keep this as high level as possible. You have the whole document that you will be asked to vote upon prior to April 1st at one of your future commission meetings. So the intent of this presentation is really to get any final comments or tweaks that the commission wants to see in this policies and procedures document before you vote on it.
I made one on the doc. I don't know if it sends you a note
Yeah,
on the PDF.
In
or
the-
PowerPoint.
on the PowerPoint or in the actual, this document?
No, the PowerPoint.
Okay,
But I'll mention it now when you get to the slide. It's
Okay.
just one note.
okay, sure. Okay, so the overall purpose of advisory boards, I know this is atypical for me. Usually I don't put a paragraph of text on the slide. But this is taken directly from the ordinance and from the document itself. That advisory boards are advisory to the commission and help the commission prioritize and think of ways to implement or recommend methods of implementation for adopted plans such as comprehensive plans, parks master plan, climate action plan, any commission priority projects that there's board involvement with, things like that. So the commission, in the decision-making process gets input from your professional staff, from your professional consultants, your engineers and solicitors, as well as the advisory board members. The overall structure of the boards, this is one of the major changes that we set up, is that there are sort of 3 tiers of members. There are the appointed voting members that the commission will appoint on a annual basis. It's your meetings in March where you appoint new members to each board. Each board has 9 members on it. They are residents. They will self-appoint a chair and vice chair every year at an organizational meeting themselves. But there are the 9 core members of the board. Beyond that, we have carved out specific liaison positions for a commission liaison, which the commission assigns every year at your reorg meeting in January. Staff liaison positions, so the municipal manager has the oversight of assigning those. Mr. McGill has assigned both a primary and secondary liaison from staff to each board, so that there's not only consistency there, but there's also coverage in case one person is out sick or something like that. And there's also backup and additional staff knowledge available. And then this is the new piece, the associate voting members. Oh, sorry, I should mention under liaisons, we've also carved out a space for the school district to have liaisons should they want to send people to any of these advisory boards. So liaisons don't vote, but they are people that are welcome, obviously, to attend the meetings. And so if the school district wants to appoint people, we're going to reach out to them and say, hey, we're going to have these new advisory boards. If you want to appoint liaisons to them so we can have more communication between what's happening at the school and what's happening at the municipality, we think that would be great.
They do. I'll cover that in the school board update at the end.
And we are, like, we have a commission liaison and a staff liaison. If the school feels it would be useful to have one of their school board members and one of their staff members be liaisons, we're open to that too. So they could have both the elected and staff member come to those meetings if they want to. That's kind of in their court. And then the associate members. So currently the Economic Development Council has this structure, and our vision is to expand it to all of the boards, that there would be liaisons from designated community organizations that wouldn't be able to vote, but could sit in on the meetings and participate in the discussions. So an example might be that the Historical Society may want to have a liaison to the Resiliency Board, which is the, Economic Development, Sustainability, Historical Preservation Board. So the commission can designate those community organizations at any time they wish. And then we'll reach out to those organizations and say, you've been designated to have a liaison representative to this board. They don't have voting powers, but they'll be able to attend the board meetings and take part in the discussions. And our goal is that that can create more conversation between the community organizations we have and what our advisory boards are doing, and B, potentially be a pathway for future board members to be developed. As well as liaisons from other boards. So currently I mentioned the EDC has this structure where they have a representative from the planning board who's a liaison to the EDC and attends those meetings and just doesn't vote. So if any of the other boards want to have a liaison to one of the other boards, they're eligible to appoint that as well. That's kind of at their discretion. Okay, commission responsibilities. So for the 5 people in the room, this is what the document lays out as far as the commissioner's responsibilities. The obvious one is the liaison role, relaying the priorities of the commission to the board to ensure that the work the board is doing aligns with the priorities of the commission, and such as adopted plans, policies. A few times the commission has done a commission retreat and said, these are our top priorities for this year. These are the things we want to focus on. Everything else is going to take a back seat to these top priorities. So ensuring that boards are aware of where the commission's priorities are in a given year, or even in a 10-year span with the comp plan, that's a key role that the commission liaison plays, as well as Commissioner Grella mentioned, reporting back in discussion session as we do now about what's happening with your boards to keep those open lines of communication with the other commissioners as well. As far as staff liaisons go, the municipal manager has assigned 2 staff liaisons, each of the new advisory boards. The staff liaisons primarily will be responsible for meeting support, drafting agendas, keeping minutes, keeping attendance records of board members, as well as sort of the institutional knowledge of a board, because board members may come and go, they term off, but the staff liaisons are the ones that are going to keep in whatever format. Currently, it's OneDrive that we have. If we move to some other document sharing retention format, the staff liaisons will be responsible for that document storage, retention, and record keeping as far as the boards go. So we have that historical knowledge as well, because surprisingly, we do sometimes get requests for old documents from boards. So that does fall to the staff, as well as onboarding and orientation of new board members. Since the staff liaisons are the ones responsible for that institutional knowledge, it makes sense that they would be the ones to be able to bring new board members up to speed on what the current priorities are of the boards and what currently being worked on, as well as overall what the work, what the guidelines are for each.
And I would assume, it's kind of an obvious question, but
Yes.
so it's out there, recording of such, the staff member at least makes sure that that board gets recorded.
Yes, yes, and we will have IT support as well, kind of like we do for commission meetings, that there's IT people available in case something goes wrong.
It's always nice to have someone in the room.
Yes, yes. Yep, and that's another advantage of having 2 liaisons that, as you all know, having been in board meetings, if one person's trying to keep minutes and sort of run the meeting and operate the online stuff, that can be a little arduous. So having 2 people there will help distribute those responsibilities during the meetings as well. So we'll talk about appointed board members first. The biggest requirement is that they are residents and that they attend meetings. That may sound simple, but it's the 2 biggest requirements within the policies and procedures document. Relocating within the municipality is not cause for removal. The document does lay out some, I'll call them guidelines for the commission as far as appointments go. They're not hard and fast rules, so the commission can, tweak them as needed. Basically, the idea is that the commission will strive to have at least 1 board member from each ward, and then no ward would have a majority of members on a given board. So to have a distribution of members from around the community, especially for topics like mobility and traffic and things like that, it's probably important to have a good mix of people from around town. So, but like I said, those are just written as guidelines. They're not hard and fast rules. They're objectives, but that's why the clause about relocating is not cause for removal. So even if someone was the member from Ward 3 and moved to Ward 2, if they were the only person from Ward 3, that would not cause them to be removed. That being said, with the caveat that I know the solicitor will always jump in on, is the commission always at any time has the ability to remove board members for any reason the commission sees fit. Meeting attendance, virtual or in person, will count towards the quorum, but for virtual attendees, we really want you to have your camera on. We've seen this come up in several board meetings over the past few years as we've transitioned to this virtual state, that people will tune into a board meeting while they're driving somewhere and just have it on in their car. That does not really constitute an active participation in a board meeting or really shouldn't count towards the quorum. So virtually with your camera on in order to count towards the quorum of the meeting. And really the expectation is for in-person attendance. The virtual option is really just for if you're sick or if you're traveling or something along those lines. That said, if you're on a family vacation, you're not required to attend a board meeting. If you're traveling for work and spending a night in a hotel room and want to tune in, then that option. For collaboration with liaisons, the commission and staff liaison, should be copied on all communications and should have access to all board documents. So right now we use the OneDrive format, so the commission liaison, staff liaison should have access to all those documents. Board members should not be creating documents that their commission liaisons and staff liaisons don't have access to. Because that can get us in a whole heap of right to know law trouble.
Is that just gonna necessitate, public folders? Is that how we handle all that? Okay.
And we have those now for several of our advisory boards, so.
I guess the question is always, because we saw this with all the DEI committees, everyone went off and created their own Word documents. The idea is that that's fine, but it has to be put into that folder at some point.
Yes, it has to live in that folder.
Right.
You can't create a Word document and save it on your personal computer. It has to be saved on the OneDrive folder where everyone has access to it.
And is the assumption that either the commission or staff liaison will make sure that that happens?
The assumption is that these policies and procedures will be communicated to board members and they will be expected to abide by them. So if a board member goes off and creates a document on their own computer without telling anyone, there's no way for staff or the commission to know that that's happening, but we will communicate to them that these are the policies and procedures adopted by the commission for how boards are expected to operate, so they'll be expected to follow.
Well, and I would put it in the context of, any one of us can sit and work on a concept, right? That we are thinking about and do it on your own personal computer, but at some point it becomes part of the formal discussion. At which point, it needs to go in. So I think, at least for me conceptually, the thought is that you work wherever you want to work. But at the point where you are bringing it to a advisory board meeting and it as a topic of discussion, at that point, it needs to become part of the formal record.
Yeah, I guess, I know because it happens now, right? And I've seen it on the DEI where we have multiple subcommittees working on different docs and, one person uses Pages, one uses Microsoft Excel, one uses some online version. It's going to be an issue sooner or later where even if they send it to us as part of formal communication, like in an email, hey, check out this document, we talked about us creating, and then it's a Word document and then we upload it to the server, but they're still working on their Word document. Now we have two versions of the same doc and no one knows which one is the most recent. So we might have to go deeper and actually put some governing rules about documentation in there. Otherwise it's going to be, there's a potential for it to get out of hand quickly.
Yeah, I agree, but I think to a certain extent, right, we have to allow people that people are going to create where they're comfortable creating. I think it's just a question of how do we make sure that, again, at some point, right, that where it is a discussion, right? If we are doing a collaborative document, we should do collaborative documents in, the municipally approved platform.
Yeah.
But if you're working on something separate, just as a concept that you want to bring to the board, do it wherever you want to do it. But when it's time to put it in the formal record and it's going to be a collaborative process.
I know we talked about having board training. It might even be worth having that in the training. If we're going to if we're going to create official board documents, here's how you log into OneDrive. Here's how you create a Word doc, an Excel doc, that kind of stuff, and just make sure they understand how to do it. I would imagine, like, we're not gonna give out Microsoft licenses to every, right, board person, but, you know, you gotta figure it out somehow.
Yeah.
OneDrive does allow other formats.
Does it?
Uploaded, yes, so.
Okay, and then the final item, with the meeting attendance is there's a carve out that board members can be placed on notice for removal by the board chair. The board chair does not have the ability to remove anyone. The board chair can recommend to the commission can consider removal. So the first step in that process is placing them on notice that, hey, your attendance has been below the standard of expectation, which would either be absent for 4 consecutive meetings or absent 6 times in a 12-month period. And that's also kind of in collaboration with the staff liaison, that the staff liaison is keeping attendance records so they know who has come to meetings when and so forth.
Sure.
Because we want our board members to be active and participating and not just using it as a-
Resume building.
Exactly, yes. Okay, so the core responsibilities of advisory boards. So I mentioned this at the beginning that to my knowledge, we're the only community that has fully aligned their comprehensive plan with their advisory boards. So we did that intentionally, that when these advisory boards take office, or not office, are instituted or constituted, they will essentially have a laid out work plan or a laid out set of goals and priorities that the commission has said, these are the areas where we would like you to focus on providing input. And one of the key functions of advisory boards right now and moving forward is providing recommendations for the capital improvement program and the budget. So right now, the commission gets lists every year from the Sports Advisory Board, the Parks Advisory Board on their priority list. My vision is that every board would now be providing those priority lists to the commission. So thinking about how we implement the comp plan, how we implement other adopted plans, whether it's the Parks Master Plan, the Climate Action Plan, any other adopted plan, active transportation plan, whatever it is, those would be sort of at the core of what boards are recommending for the commission to fund as part of the budget. So the boards themselves aren't actually doing the nuts and bolts implementation, but they're prioritizing and recommending how things may get implemented and in what order things may get implemented.
This is my one note, and it's semantics. I think the presentation is great. The policies, since we've had them in place, they've gotten better. I think they're great. It may be semantics, but I think we need to change the wording here because they are not implementing the plan, the comprehensive plan, or any of our plans. They're making recommendations for the implementation of. So I think we should change this to recommendations for implementation. I just don't want it to be confused that the actual advisory groups are doing the implementation. That rests with.
Probably those first 3, quite honestly, recommendations on implementation of the
Right.
comprehensive plan. adopted plan.
Prioritization list is fine, you know,
Again, those are
Yeah.
recommendations.
those first 2. And I know you mentioned early in the beginning, you have a comment from the charter or the ordinance, and that is how it's phrased in the ordinance, that they'll make recommendations.
Yeah. And then I think that's just a PowerPoint thing of how I
Yeah.
phrase it. I don't think it's
Like I
actually
said, I think that the
formal
policies are
document.
great, the plan is great, the overall documented policy is good, the structure is good. I just don't want it, you know, somewhere along the line where people are saying like, well, we have this, and in reality, in practical nature, the comprehensive plan is not a set, it's not a to-do list. There are recommendations within the comprehensive plan, so we still need to decide on a lot of that stuff that we would be giving to the boards anyway, so.
Yes. Thank you. So as part of the core responsibilities, the recommendation of goals, projects, capital items is mostly at the core of what we're going to be asking the advisory boards to do. They'll each be asked to develop their own work plan throughout the year for any priorities that arise from both the adopted plans, policies, priorities of the commission. Really, that should be the biggest point I was trying to make with this slide is that we want the advisory board structure to be a top-down approach. The commission should be the one saying, these are the areas where we want input. These are where our priorities are. This is where our focus is. this is where we want you focusing as a board. Not the sort of tail wagging the dog approach of a board saying, hey, we have this great idea, we did all this work on it, here's what we think should happen. And then the commission saying, no, we're not interested in that. And all the board members getting frustrated and resigning, because that's happened a few times in history. So I think the top-down approach of the commission saying, this is what our priorities are, this is where we want you to focus, these are our adopted plans, these are our priorities we've identified, works a lot better for the advisory board structure. And that kind of feeds into the work plan, as well as requiring them to submit an annual report every year to the planning office, so that we can keep track of what work was done on implementing or the various adopted policies, procedures, plans, as well as capital projects, things like that. Because since, as we saw last year, the planning office took over the concatenation of the CIP, that it's important for us to be able to track what was actually put into place and what's being recommended.
The only other item,
Yes.
I'm sorry, the only other item that I would just call out in their core responsibilities are, and two are immediately coming to mind for me. One is, the traffic board, does hear items. And the Parks Board does go and assess parks, right? Those are ongoing activities that are of a supportive nature.
Might require additional information than just a work plan, but
Yeah,
that's also outlined in their specific duties too.
right, yeah, they are. But again, it's not here in this list. So there's not just these kind of core things. There are these ongoing kind of support functions that these boards have developed over years that are very valuable, that we want to retain, and don't lose them.
Do we, I know we've got the document for the policies, right? Is the intention to give this to the boards and have this be like a, like a roadmap of sort, or is that purely what the policies are gonna be for?
We're gonna give them the policies. My intent was that I would probably do some kind of onboarding for the new board members, whether that's me attending the first meeting of every new board in April. And maybe not this exact presentation, I'll probably go into a lot more detail on what the specific what the specific tasks assigned to that board are, as laid out in the ordinance. Some high-level discussion of what that section of the comprehensive plan discussed, as well as some of just the key functions. But a lot of this needs to be given to them as saying, here is how we expect your board to operate from a functional standpoint. So yeah, so I'm developing an onboarding plan for all the new board members.
I feel like we need to add something to the slide, or?
Not necessarily. I think it is important to recognize that there are those types of projects. Again, having had enough board members express, want to be sure that we're not losing something valuable. So, leave it to your discretion as to whether you add another bullet there. But I personally do think that a onboarding training is great. And I have discussed it. I know it's a time commitment, to go through that type of process. But I do think kind of level setting and giving everybody a kind of a solid framework would be very helpful. It's a question of, do we have capacity to really do it in a way that is going to provide a lot of value?
I think we should, because the boards will provide a lot of value.
We had talked about using the first meeting of each board for sort of that onboarding, and then also potentially recording that so that it's out there as a resource for them, so
That's
that
a good
they can
idea.
go back.
Yep.
Say, hey, what did he say about whatever it is?
Right. Sure.
Robert's Rules of Order, or electing a chair, or
Put that in the drive for people to go back to.
right, so that it's there as a reference tool. So that's.
Makes sense.
Yeah, we should do that. If we, I know it's a little bit of extra time, but to do that level set will be good, because the realignment, having a renewed focus on and really pushing down what we feel is going to be important for everyone to focus on. I think that comes back to us in the form of better, more focused recommendations.
Yeah, and I think staff is also fully aware that, I'm gonna tell you, for the first, 3 to 6 months, there's going to be a little bit of an extra lift by staff to, again, ensure that we are sort of onboarding everybody with the same information. We're helping through with, and get to these with some of the standardization that we talked about in terms of when agendas are created, even the way that an agenda appears, the way that minutes are done.
Yeah.
Again, I think it'll benefit us long-term.
Yeah.
If we spend that extra time up front.
Yeah.
Thank you for that great segue into my next slide. So this is another thing that I'll definitely go into more detail with each advisory board when I talk to them, but for tonight's purposes, just a high level. Advisory boards generally are gonna be expected to adhere to the Sunshine Act, follow Robert's Rules of Order, have standardized agendas. I have a little sample one there, and then a standardized pre-meeting schedule and RSVP deadline. So I know this is something that some commissioners have asked for, as well as some staff members have asked for, that, different boards have different sort of deadlines when they say, okay, this is when our board members need to get back to us to tell us if we're having a meeting or not, which dictates when things get posted on the website. It's gonna be standardized for everyone across the board, and this will be communicated to board members at the orientation meeting and well in advance. And all of our board members are adults, and we can treat them like adults and expect them to RSVP by the RSVP deadline, so that we can make a decision on whether or not the board has a quorum to be able to meet, and then get the agendas posted to the website in advance of the meeting, so that all that information can be made available and public on a standard timeline. And at the December discussion session, the commission set the standardized meeting times for all the boards, so everyone knows when their board will be meeting. And I structured this as 6, 7, 8 days prior, because all the board dates the commission decided upon were Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So the 6, 7, 8 days would all fall on weekdays, so that those would never fall on a weekend, unless it was a year where there was some kind of holiday celebration and we had to bump a board meeting to a Monday or a Thursday, but that's why we put them on Tuesdays and Wednesdays to kind of give us that flexibility as well.
Is the idea here too that we're just gonna let the chair kind of self-police that it goes on the right stuff, or is there someone who's, owns the function of looking at making sure that we're using standardized docs and things like that?
If we go back to the staff liaison responsibilities, they're the one responsible for doing all the meeting support. So the way it's written is that the staff liaison and the board chair will finalize the agenda. So the staff liaisons will draft the agenda, let the board chair take a look at it. The board chair will be expected to either sign off on it, or if we don't hear from them, we'll just assume it's fine, by 8 days prior. And then I'll have the board members RSVP by 7 days prior, and then be able to have the agenda posted 6 days prior to the meeting.
Few things from me. One is, yes, we're creating more structure. But I think structure is helpful because it is going to create more consistency for everybody. With the new website, right, as Laura will attest, I am poking regularly. It's like, I want the meeting agenda up so I can just go see it online. Any resident should be able to go see it online, see what people are talking about, have time to prepare and think about these topics. Know where the meeting is, the Zoom link should be prepared. Right? All those things should just get done well in advance, so that residents and board members and commissioners all know where to go and when to look, and don't have to have it on, in a diary somewhere. So that's one thing. So it is creating more structure, and that can be frustrating, and I totally agree. The other side of it, though, is that, again, while we are creating more structure, what happens within the framework of the structure is still ultimately at the discretion of that board, right? We are advising and we are working to get them, in a direction that we want, but it's still their meeting, right? We just need to make sure that we have this consistency so that there's more efficiency in the process. And the other piece of this that I've been thinking a lot about is that, as there's a lot of consolidation on these boards, there is going to be more kind of voting activity occurring in these meetings. I would equate it to a discussion session versus a commission meeting, right? We discuss here, we vote there. This is largely, in many respects, I would anticipate going to become more of a voting meeting, right? That there's going to be more to vote on, more to bring forward formally through Robert's Rules of Order, right? Vote on and move items through, as opposed to just long discussions. Subcommittees have been created, people can meet, they can have discussions outside of that discussion or that meeting, because those meetings are going to become more and more about getting through items as opposed to just broad discussions. If that's, obviously there will be readouts, but I think creating that more formal framework is going to create more efficiency for people, because some of these meetings can go 3-4 hours.
I think they're gonna have to focus on what's important, just by nature of going down from 170 boards to 5, that kind of thing.
Right.
I think it's just, a lot down to a little, and by nature of not wanting to have a 10-hour meeting.
Right.
They're gonna have to be hyper-focused.
Yeah, and using that subcommittee structure, I think, will allow people to continue to do work, right? You still have the fluidity. But when it comes to this level where we want this broader public engagement, right? We want the formal process, we want the transparency. We need to create this structure so that all this can get synthesized into a process where people can understand the framework and participate in a understood structure.
Yeah, I think the good format about this is, sometimes I'll get questions, usually it's directed at the traffic board. It seems like residents are never able to make it to the traffic board, because that's where I get questions about meetings, and I'm constantly sending, Keith or one of the police officers an email, like, can you please forward the minutes to this meeting to this person? It's like if you go to Amazon, like, where the review section is, where the
Right.
questions are, where the ratings are. If we have a very easy, accessible place on the website, no matter the committee meeting, a resident can look up and understand what happened in that committee meeting, what the disposition of any votes were, or, what they're dealing with in general.
Right. Agreed.
Which will make it a lot more accessible than it is now.
And as we've also discussed, creating a annual calendar for boards. So the advisory board section of this is relatively light, and I tried to focus this just on reports and budgets because that's mostly the top priority of the commission. So the commission at the top, appointing new board members in March every year that then take their seats in April. And then in August every year by charter, the commission receives the CIP. Traditionally, that was also the month when the planning office presented the report on the achievements of the comprehensive plan in the past year. November is when the commission receives the budget, and then December is when the budget and capital improvement plan are approved by the commission. So backing up from the commission level, you see the key markers there for staff and for advisory boards for when staff starts to prepare the CIP. And prior to that is when we need the input from the advisory boards on their recommended CIP priority lists and their budget requests or recommendations, things of that nature. So advisory boards may also develop additional things they want to do. So Commissioner Flynn mentioned with the Parks Board doing the annual assessment of the parks. So the new Parks and Recreation Board may say, okay, November of every year, we're going to mark that in our calendars. That's the month where we discuss the visits to the parks. We're going to do those visits in October, something of that nature. The boards can kind of define that for themselves, but I think having a standardization too of they know that certain months things have to happen, whether it's their reorganization meeting, whether it's submitting their annual reports or submitting their CIP priority list, I think will be helpful to help structure the board's conversations as well. Okay. So there is a limitation on the new advisory boards. I think this is a very key point, that advisory boards and their subcommittees do not have the authority to perform the following functions. Direct activities of municipal employees. The only one that can do that is the municipal manager. So if they want municipal employees to do something, they need to make that request through the municipal manager. Expend municipal funds. This is another obvious one. The only way municipal funds can be expended is if it's budgeted by the commission and approved by the manager. Enter into contracts on behalf of the municipality. Once again, powers that rest with the commission and the manager. And performing functions conferred upon another Commonwealth agency, that's a statutory item that was thanks to the solicitor. So I think this is all pretty straightforward, but I know that there are times when certain board members think that because they're on a board, they have the ability to direct a municipal employee to do something. This very clearly spells out, and it's spelled out in the policies and procedures document, that individual board members, boards as a whole, or board subcommittees do not have the ability to do any of these things. Okay. Finally, subcommittees and ad hoc committees. The policies and procedures document gives the advisory boards the ability to create subcommittees or the commission. So the commission has certain abilities as laid out in the administrative code to create ad hoc committees, which was what the commission did for the DEI initiative. They serve a one-year term as defined in the administrative code. The ad hoc committees, they may contain non-residents, that's specific within the charter. And they may be either standalone bodies or fall under the oversight of an advisory board. So when we did the DEI initiative, the commission kind of nested those ad hoc groups under the community relations board. The commission could choose to do that with future ad hoc committees, or could form them as standalone committees to study a certain thing. Subcommittees may be created either by the commission or by an advisory board. So if let's say the Parks and Rec Committee, I'll go back to Commissioner Flynn's example because it's at the top of my head. If they want to create a subcommittee to just deal with parks maintenance and pick a few members, so it's laid out very specifically, subcommittees can't contain a quorum of board members, but if there's 9 members, so it can't be more than 5. So I'll say, if they want to pick a couple, 2, 3, 4, to be a subcommittee on that will take care of going out and actually doing the walking tours of the parks and then report back to the board. That is a completely eligible activity for an advisory board to undertake. The way it's written is they expire in March every year, and then the board during the reorganization meeting in April can renew renew subcommittees. So subcommittees can be renewed indefinitely, but that's just to make sure that they're continuing to be thought about by the advisory boards. And it's not just, oh, well, we have this thing and we don't know why we have it, but annually have to say, okay, is this part of the functions of what we want to do in this upcoming year? Okay, yes, it is. We're going to continue to have this subcommittee. So subcommittees may also contain both the appointed voting members and the associate members, but not a quorum of the appointed members. So you could have a subcommittee that has 9 or 10 people, but if only 3 of them are the appointed members of the board, they're the only ones that have the ability to vote. So that would be acceptable. Subcommittees also in the standardized agenda, a few slides back. I know it's really hard to see because it's small, but there's a carve out spot here, number 6, for subcommittee reports. So they will be expected to give reports back to the board, and then all documents created by the subcommittee must be shared with the commission and staff liaisons, once again, for Sunshine Act and right to know law purposes, as well as just historical documentation and institutional knowledge. We need to be able to have access to that stuff too. But with like the OneDrive structure, we could create a subfolder within OneDrive for that subcommittee's work or whatever. We just, similar to the prior discussion, need to make sure that those documents are shared. Okay, and then, finally, next steps. So we've talked about the policies and procedures document tonight. So we'll be asking the commission to adopt that at a future voting meeting. If the commission has any comments or questions on the policies and procedures document, I'm happy to answer them. And then the deadline has now passed for people to have their applications in for advisory boards. So I know you all take the lengthy amount of time it takes to review all those and determine the new advisory board appointments sometime in March. And then we'll have an orientation for the new board members, and April 1st, the new boards are in effect. So if I can just make one sort of personal request, and the commission doesn't have to listen to me at all if you don't want to, but if possible, I know traditionally the commission has appointed new board members at the second meeting in March, but because we're doing orientation for a bunch of new board members, if the commission can do it at the first March meeting, I think that would be better, because then we can start getting information out to these people sooner, knowing that they're going to be appointed. So I know that may mean a lengthier exec session at some point to discuss your appointments to boards and authorities. But that's just my personal request, because I think for onboarding the new board members, it would be helpful to have a couple extra weeks there.
Agreed.
Sounds like the next discussion session is going to be shorter because we have a long exec session.
Right, and do the
Yeah.
discussion of who these people will be.
One
Yes, sir.
point on your calendar of reports and budgets,
Yes.
actually 2 points. Because these boards will be newly constituted as of April, the CIP lists submitted by those boards, I would imagine would rely on sort of the existing priorities from current boards. So we should
Yes.
make sure that those are clearly defined for the new board members. And then the reorg meeting, if we're going to spend the first meeting sort of as an orientation meeting, that reorg meeting may not happen till May, and in future years, May make a little bit more sense because you're going to appoint 3 new board members in a perfect world, right? For each one of these boards. In March, their first meeting would be April. You may want to give them a meeting to acclimate themselves a little bit and then do those appointments. So
That makes sense. And really the reorg is just figuring out who the chair and the vice chair are, but
Yeah.
your point is
Yeah.
well taken that, yeah,
Chair, the vice chair and the subcommittees.
yeah,
Yeah.
and subcommittees, right. Okay,
Very good.
so are there any questions, comments, concerns about this policies and procedures document? I know there were a few comments on my slides, which I can make tweaks to that before I present them to the advisory boards, but on the document itself, which is the thing the commission is going to be asked to vote upon, any last comments or questions before we put it on a voting meeting?
I guess the one thing that, going back to things that advisory boards cannot do. Do we want to explicitly state that advisory boards are not permitted to have booths or represent themselves as a board to the community outside of these meetings? My concern, to be more broad, is that I don't go have a booth and say I am the commissioner of Mount Lebanon. We represent, right, as a commission, we don't have booths, right? We would participate in a municipal booth. I get concerned with lots of boards having their own message. And I'm okay with boards participating in municipally sponsored booths, as an example. But I feel like that should be something that's approved, by the commission ahead of time, as opposed to it, people coming and saying, hey, we want to go do this thing. We're gonna go do this thing. And then no one's really aware of it.
I think the problem in the past is because despite what we thought, perhaps the message wasn't clear, what the board members could and couldn't do. And I think where we've run into trouble is where board members, these were very specific boards, felt that it was their job to advocate for certain things. And I think that's where we ran into trouble, 'cause not every board, right? There was very specific boards where we ran into issues where they were clearly outside the mandate of the board. Some in cases where we were even having conversations about, legal stuff, like, hey, have we done something, or is there a potential to do something that may be outside of the charter, that kind of stuff. I think the structure we've created is much more clear what the mandate of the board and therefore what the board members would be doing in terms of their work. So I'm not as afraid of that now. I would love to see, boards set up booths at events, knowing that they're going to be advocating for the right material and the right stuff. And I think that's going to be, the onus is going to be on the staff liaison and the commission liaison to make sure that the boards are focused and know what they're talking about. But I think it would be great for boards to interact more with the community outside of their one a month or one per quarter, whatever their particular meeting might be.
Well, no, and I don't disagree, right? I think, I'm with you 100%, frankly. I think it's more a question of how does the municipality ensure that that framework is approved,
Right.
right? It's so, for argument's sake, right, resilience is going to include a lot of sustainability. Which generally has very strong advocates for, sustainability, right?
Sure.
Recycling, whatever it might be. advocacy has to stop to a certain extent when you are representing the municipality, right? And you are working within approved, with approved materials, with approved, so there's gotta be some process to it.
Yeah.
And how do we ensure that that process is in place? And do we need to be clear in our policies that this is, there is a, the commission needs to approve, or the manager needs to approve, or whatever it might be, going into this? I think that's the one question that's on my mind.
And I agree with Commissioner Flynn, much like we have this limitations on advisory boards, some sort of formal, whatever to say, there's a structure you have to go through.
Yeah.
To each of your points about, there should be some interaction with the community, but you gotta get permission first. There had to be, we're all on the same page, that the message, whatever it happens to be, is communicated.
Right.
So,
And
what do
so
we
that's
normally
where that
do?
pre-approval, and I don't know how to wordsmith it, but
Yeah.
there should be some bullet.
Yeah, I
that
agree.
addresses-
So page 12 of the document, I'll put it up here, has this point I about the apolitical nature of boards, and in that paragraph has some language on events and things like that, so.
I could see there being an issue with, the commission and the staff liaison have given a topic of focus or guidance, the commission and staff are aligned in this. And then that could be read as, or they go out and just advocate further for it, where it's not even political. It could just be, hey, setting up a booth and saying, we want to do a shopping market where the south garage is, like, that's not something we've discussed, that may be interpreted. Conversations that we have about, hey, there's all different possibilities, what we could do there, may then be interpreted as, hey, let's go out in the community, set up a booth and take comments about something. Like, to me, I would see, that's not political, but that's probably going beyond their purview.
Right,
I-
and taking that to say, because I agree with this apolitical, and
Yeah.
yeah, it should be there.
Yeah,
To your point, we talked about the garage and saying, if we as commission say, we want the community outreach board to do this.
right.
Much like when we had the consultants saying, collect data for the comp plan, we want them to go get this, but it's
Yes.
very specific. This is what the app is,
Yes.
how you collect, this is the information you bring back, but it's a very specific direct information.
When we have the big uptown parties, what's the process for a vendor to get in there? They just, they pay a fee, or, they say, hey, here's who we are. Do we have eyes on that, like, generally?
Eric oversees all those requests, they come through him.
Do we want to do something similar, like Steve is saying, and I think what Andrew's saying is, maybe there's a paragraph in there that says if the board is going to table or be a vendor in some sort of community thing, they need to submit, it's not like we need pictures of the buttons they're gonna put on the table, but, some understanding of what.
I like this
Yeah.
language.
Yeah.
I think it's frankly just important to synthesize it as part of the,
Presentation.
yeah.
About not independently hosting events or formally attend events that are not approved or coordinated by the municipality.
Right.
The other thing I don't want to do here, quite honestly, I don't want staff having to attend
Right,
a series of
events.
events because they already spend,
Yep.
well
Yeah.
above the
Amount of time.
40 hours a week
Yeah.
that is a traditional. And I realize that, they're compensated as such, but still, the other piece of it, I think to Craig's point, that statement in and of itself is fine to communicate that, but we should probably also develop more specific things that say, if,
Notify us.
well, and we need to approve the materials that are going
Right.
to be distributed.
Yeah.
Right,
We need to understand if they are asked questions that are outside of what they're really there,
what they're supposed to say.
that those should be
Yeah.
just referred to staff in terms
That's
of
probably
sending
a good
an
idea
email.
too, yeah.
Because I
Even things like press should go to
Right.
PIO and
Right.
that, right,
very, very well-intentioned residents who are trying to be helpful.
right.
I just want to make sure that we have that.
Because I can see, like, we have very active representatives here, whether it's the local, state level, congressional level. This covers, Representative DeLuzio might have an Earth Day. And it would be an obvious thing, we're like, hey, maybe Parks and Rec shows up and shows some support and they, do a booth. I think this paragraph makes it clear that that shouldn't happen, right? But to your point, having conversations even at municipal functions which are approved, if you're approached by media or, like you said, have questions that you can't answer or shouldn't answer, it should go to the proper Yes. That's probably good language to put in there.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that having municipal booths at things like Earth Day are fantastic, and board members should participate. Right, that, it is 100% where I want to see them engaged in the community,
Mhm.
but it is a municipal booth,
Right.
right? It is not an advocacy booth,
Yeah.
right? It is municipal materials explaining the municipality's positions. Obviously, you can have conversations about, what you think.
Yeah.
But the materials are municipal. So there does need to be some structure around that, and it just needs to be clearly communicated. Frankly, I think from a staff perspective, right? If a board says we want to participate in X, Y, and Z events over the course of the upcoming year, that needs to get probably approval from the commission, not just the manager, because it will require staff time,
Presumably it'd be in a work plan.
right? So I think those things, again, there's just gonna need to be some more structure in this.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that, the municipality is presenting the best foot
Yeah.
forward it can.
And I agree with that, just like what we have there, just some bullet point, more than just section I. But it's just something, say whatever, I'm thinking, I'll leave it to people better than me to wordsmith it, but I feel like it's just one of those quick, even if they say, well, what does that mean? Then go see.
Yeah.
Minutia.
Yeah.
Great.
So we're good with that language for the document itself, just tweak my presentation. Got it.
Yeah.
On those.
Well, I think, for the document itself, adding,
One thing that you said you changed, was that?
well, that was just for the presentation, saying recommendations instead of implementation. And then, but I just want to be clear, we are advocating for a change of the policy. Adding some sort of language that says something related to, I think the apolitical stuff covers political, but there are the potential to have a whole slew of things that the boards may want to join that we need to make it clear. Because I would read that and say, well, like I went to Pittsburgh, recreation fair. And we set up a Mount Lebanon table there. That falls outside of apolitical. So, there would be no onus upon the board to notify anybody of that. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what I'd like to see,
Right.
before we vote on this, something in writing on that.
Yeah, I just want
It's
to be,
not
that's
the
what we're asking,
paragraph,
right?
it's that bullet point, whatever.
Yeah.
It sounds like we're kind of together on the concept, just the words.
I think we are advocating for a change of the actual policy, an addition of,
It might just be taking out apolitical and putting a more appropriate word at the top of that.
Yeah, pulling that out as a separate bullet.
I
Very separate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just turned it into two paragraphs, basically, yeah, exactly. Because there was the section on the events, programs, educational materials championed by advisory boards are municipal functions hosted by the municipality and need to allow municipal mission. So yeah, I'll just make that its own paragraph, basically.
Okay.
So, yep, I'll highlight that when you get this for the 5th time in your packet.
We're almost there, we're almost there.
each time, we're heading in the right direction.
You shouldn't give us this much time on an agenda item discussion.
It's not your fault.
It is out,
All right.
Thank you.
IDA meeting?
Well, we have 2 minutes before you can officially start that, so
Oh,
if there's
sorry.
anything that you want to get from board, please.
Yeah, I would just say, we have the field utilization study results. I have the paper copy of that now, so
Yeah.
I'll send some, I know I said last time I'd send summaries, but I got the paper copy. And the group is ready anytime to come and present, and it's really a good presentation.
Good.
So I'll do the quick, board and authorities. I did have a chance to meet with the liaison for the school board, Ms. Brenna Crable, who's fantastic. We are setting up regular meetings outside of our own meetings to talk about stuff. Just totally in agreement that the governing body should work better and can work better, and she has some ideas. She also did tell me that they got all the stuff that we sent them related to the new boards, and they are gonna be assigning liaisons to the boards from the school, which is great, so we'll have participation there. And I would say if we can move them into, there's no rush, but if we move them into an actual discussion session, they'll come and give the presentation, which I think everyone be impressed with. It's thorough. Yeah.
Great.
I've got something from Outreach that, their longtime director, Mary Burks, is retiring this summer.
Whoa,
Yeah,
whoa.
yeah, that's big news. So kind of when the end of their budget year ends, so, July-ish. And they've started the process of finding and selecting her replacement.
Gee. Community Relations Board is talking about tabling.
Love it. That was awesome.
Timely.
Twice, but.
Very timely.
But apparently Dormont is wrestling with the same issue of having,
A
boards
lot,
and.
a lot of communities are
Yeah,
starting to have.
so
those conversations.
You probably already know that, but that was something they were talking about, so. You have it.
I want to get it in before we pass the policy.
Yeah, I know, exactly, right? Yeah, I know, yeah.
And then we can say it's
And the
manager who
Residents
said-
Academy is still ongoing and wrapping up fairly soon.
I'll find out.
29th, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We can't get that one for anybody that's interested.
yes, there will be cake,
Uh,
okay?
We are ready for the IDA meeting. I'm going to tell you that we're gonna do this kind of like the Wizard of Oz, pay no attention.
Yeah.
The man behind the curtain, because I was more focused on the agenda and Phil and I were talking about the IDA. So the initials beside the items, throw them all out. I picked
I
and
was scratching my
Commissioner
head.
Burrell, I gave you the consideration of the minutes from the meeting.
Got it.
But
I
we'll,
don't have any items at the main meeting, so I can always spill into here.
Right, right, right.
all right.
So I will call to order the meeting of the IDA Authority for February 13th, 2024. Mr. Grella.
Thank you, Madam President. Consideration of the minutes from the meeting held November 14, 2023. I move to approve the minutes.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Do we have any public comment?
Great job.
I know, right? Finally getting it down. Any public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to Mr. McGill and the report of the manager.
Nothing a little different from the manager's report for the IDA. The bonds that were issued by the IDA for Point Park were recently paid off. As this was the only bond issue outstanding, the IDA now has no current projects. We do have an IDA schedule for future meetings in 2024, which includes meetings on May 14th, August 13th, and November 12th. The solicitor and I will continue to have a conversation as to the necessity to hold those meetings. We will leave the IDA in place for the time being for some potential lending opportunities that may be upcoming depending on projects that may move forward here in the municipality. And you have the balance sheet for the IDA. Again, obviously no new borrowings. New lendings, and again, has remained fairly consistent since the last meeting. And that's all I have from everything.
Hey, thank you very much, Mr. McGill. So, I move we adjourn the meeting. Hi, we're adjourned. What was the?
We had.